Hey everyone, in one of our recent videos, we covered the very debatable topic of Swamp Thing versus Man-Thing, and in this one, we'll talk exclusively about the former. If you thought you knew this character, think again. We'll be telling you 25 absolutely insane facts that span from Alan Moore's era, all the way to the New 52. Let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The big reveal. Back in 1984, the Swamp Thing comic was struggling, almost on its last legs. Then, a writer named Alan Moore stepped in with artist Stephen Bissette and John Totleben. Instead of hitting the reset button, Alan Moore took the existing story and made it into something mind-blowing, starting with issue number 21, The Anatomy Lesson. The shocking moment happens when Jason Woodrue, a plant-based villain who goes by the name Floronic Man, is hired to examine Swamp Thing's corpse. He makes a discovery that Swamp Thing's insides aren't human organs, they're just plant imitations. This means the original scientist, Alec Holland, died in the lab explosion that created Swamp Thing, meaning that Swamp Thing is a separate plant creature that simply absorbed Holland's memories and thought it was him. The Green Guardian. Following that shocking revelation, Alan Moore went even further in revealing Swamp Thing's identity, making him the avatar of the Green. Consider the Green to be the power and consciousness that unites all plant life. Swamp Thing, who possessed amazing control over an extensive botanical network, was selected as its defender. The establishment of the Parliament of Trees solidified this significance. It's an ancient, sage council of powerful plant elementals, mostly from Brazil, many of whom were once avatars of the Green. They train and select new champions like Swamp Thing to protect the Green from threats, especially from adversaries like the Rot and the Red. Floronic Man's dangerous plant plan. The storyline with Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man, turned into an ecological horror story. After his autopsy revealed Swamp Thing's true plant nature, Jason Woodrue, who was already a plant-powered bad guy, gained a new connection to the Green. This led him to believe that humans were a plague on Earth, and he decided to wipe out all animal life on the planet. In order to leave only plant life, he intended to control all plants to produce so much oxygen that all humans and animals would perish. Although Swamp Thing was struggling with his own identity issues, he came to the realization that plants actually require the carbon dioxide exhaled by humans and animals in order to survive. Without it, a dead world would result from the plants eventually dying as well. Abby Arcane. The character of Abigail Arcane became important during Alan Moore's run, serving as Swamp Thing's emotional anchor. She was first married to Matthew Cable, a government agent who became increasingly unstable. She and Swamp Thing became closer after Matt's untimely death, which resulted in a special love tale. In one particularly memorable issue, Abigail is able to establish a physical and emotional bond with the Green through the consumption of a unique psychedelic plant created by Swamp Thing. The British influence. A key component of the so-called British invasion in American comics, Alan Moore's groundbreaking work on the saga of the Swamp Thing paved the way for DC's Vertigo imprint. He introduced a new degree of literary depth, mature subject matter, and a deconstructive approach to DC Comics, joining other British talents like Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison. In 1993, DC Comics established the Vertigo imprint to publish these more adult-oriented stories without offending their primary superhero readership. Although Alan didn't write exclusively for Vertigo, the Swamp Thing issues were included in the imprint. Constantine steps in. One of the coolest characters brought into the DC universe was John Constantine, who showed up for the first time in Swamp Thing issue number 37. In 1985, they came up with this idea for a supernatural advisor for Swamp Thing. Imagine a grumpy chain-smoking magician from the working class, who looked like the musician Sting. He quickly became important and guided Swamp Thing through the terrifying American Gothic story arc. His knowledge of magic and street smarts made him incredibly popular. So popular that he got his own hugely successful comic, Hellblazer, in 1988. That solo series ended up being the longest running and most successful title from DC's Vertigo imprint. Unleashing Nature's Rage. Swamp Thing took aim at the way that people were destroying the planet. The stories illustrated the detrimental effects on the environment by focusing on topics like pollution, deforestation, and the depletion of natural resources. Alan Moore also didn't hold back when addressing challenging social issues that weren't frequently addressed in comics at that time. He studied racism, especially in the American Gothic arc, where Swamp Thing tackles the prejudices in the American South. The show examined gun violence and the wider issues of society's disintegration, portraying these as detrimental not only to individuals, but also to all living things on the planet. Using supernatural horror to examine the pressures women face, Alan even touched on women's issues, such as how society views menstruation. Earth's Cosmic Protector. Swamp Thing represented the life of all plants in the entire universe and was more than just a swamp monster. He was the Green's avatar. Because of his upgraded status, he began to combat threats, far more widespread than local objects or human villains. He was now responsible for protecting the equilibrium of life from cosmic powers, otherworldly creatures, and supernatural beings. Swamp Thing's close relationship with the Green gave him almost unbounded powers to heal himself, manipulate plants, and project his thoughts over long distances, enabling him to fight off threats that were present everywhere. New 52. When DC Comics launched their New 52 reboot in 2011, which was a soft restart of their entire universe, writer Scott Snyder and artist Yannick Paquette took over Swamp Thing. They gave the character a fresh start, while still honoring his long history. One big change from the original revelation was bringing Alec Holland directly back, so he got resurrected during a storyline called Brightest Day, and initially tried to stay away from becoming Swamp Thing again and from his link to the Green. However, the forces of the Green, facing a threat from the Rot, forced Alec to embrace his destiny once more. This time, the story made it clear that Alec Holland was indeed the true Swamp Thing, the living avatar of the Green. The Parliament Under Attack. In the New 52 Swamp Thing series by Scott Snyder and Yannick Paquette, the old and respected Parliament of Trees found itself in serious trouble. While the Parliament's role as the keepers of the Green's knowledge was still important, we were introduced to a devastating new enemy called the Rot. The Rot opposed both plant life and animal life. The story established that Arcane, Swamp Thing's longtime villain, became the avatar of the Rot, leading its forces to try to consume and corrupt all life. This put the Parliament of Trees, the very heart of the Green, in direct danger. The Elemental War. The New 52 era ramped up the elemental stories in the DC universe with a trio of opposing forces. Swamp Thing and Animal Man comics told the story of an approaching elemental war that threatened to swallow all of existence. The Rot, led by the evil Arcane and his family, tried to spread its influence and turn living things into decaying creatures, threatening to consume both the Green and the Red. A whole forest of guardians. With time, Swamp Thing was expanded by revealing that there have been countless Swamp Things throughout history. This revelation transformed him from a lonely monster into just one link in a long chain of elemental protectors. The Parliament of Trees was the home for all these past avatars. Each version of Swamp Thing was a plant elemental chosen by the Green, and it was given the memories and consciousness of a dying human. These older Swamp Things represented different eras and cultures, showing the Green's continuous presence over thousands of years. Breaking the rules. Swamp Thing holds an important spot in comic book history because it was one of the first major mainstream comics to openly dump the Strict Comics Code Authority, CCA, for mature content. This opened the door for much greater artistic freedom in the whole industry. In 1984, DC Comics made a bold decision to release the Saga of the Swamp Thing number 29 without the CCA seal of approval. This was a big deal at the time, as the code had long controlled what could be in comics, often censoring horror, violence, and sexuality. Abby's twisted family tree. Other than being Swamp Thing's greatest love, Abigail Arcane has a complicated family history. Her uncle, Anton Arcane, is one of Swamp Thing's oldest villains. He's the avatar of the Rot. Because of this family lineage, Abby herself carries a natural connection to the Rot. This made her an emotional anchor in the ongoing elemental war. Vertigo's wild plant horror. Under creators like Grant Morrison and Mark Millar, the series went further into bizarre plant horror and existential dread. This period took all those philosophical ideas Alan Moore introduced and cranked them up to head into weirder and more unsettling places. Morrison and Millar's run, which sometimes gets overlooked, showed us a disturbing vision of Swamp Thing's existence. Gotham's Green Takeover. In Growth Patterns, issues number 53 through 56, Swamp Thing confronts the damaging effects of human activity on the environment through a series of events. Swamp Thing's anger erupts when his beloved Abigail Arcane is forcibly taken by government agents in Gotham. He unleashes a greening of Gotham, where invasive plants engulf the city's buildings. Driven by his link to the Green, streets become choked with vegetation, buildings become overgrown, and the raw power of nature totally overpowers the tech-driven dominance of the city. With this spectacular display of power, he faces off against Batman. Scientist, God, back from the dead guy. The character of Alec Holland has been on an ever-changing journey. He started as a regular scientist, then became a plant elemental god, and then got a rebirth in the New 52. Initially, Holland was a brilliant biochemist whose tragic death in a swamp explosion supposedly led to the creation of Swamp Thing, a creature people thought was just a mutated version of him, but it was debunked with Alec Holland's death and the fact that Swamp Thing was a plant elemental that just absorbed his memories. When the world died, the New 52's Rotworld storyline. crossover between Swamp Thing and Animal Man plunged the DC Universe into an apocalypse dominated by the Rot. This arc gave us one of the grimmest and most body horror-filled visions in modern comics. In Rotworld, Swamp Thing and Animal Man are zapped 1 year into a future where the Rot has won. Earth has become a wasteland and is filled with zombified versions of familiar heroes and villains, mutated monsters, and a constant suffocation. The human form illusion. He often struggled with his embrace of humanity. In an attempt to interact more intimately with Abigail, he learned to manipulate plant matter to form a semblance of his original human body. However, this human form was always temporary and imperfect. This ability highlighted his evolving control over the green and his desire for a connection he could no longer have in the traditional sense. Grow, heal, teleport. Swamp Thing has an ever-evolving set of powers, and this makes him one of the most powerful elemental beings in the DC Universe. First and foremost, he can instantly regrow his body from any plant matter. If his current form gets destroyed, he can simply reform a new one from any vegetation. Does that mean that he's essentially immortal, as long as the green exists? Yes. Not to forget that he can also transfer his mind across huge distances through the green. This spore travel lets him project his consciousness into any plant and then reform a physical body at his destination, giving him instant teleportation anywhere there's plant life. Beyond Earth, Swamp Thing was not limited to Earth. He went on cosmic adventures. For example, in the aftermath of Crisis on Infinite Earths, he traveled through space and reshaped alien plant life on other planets and connected with different forms of the green across the cosmos. Talking to every plant. One of Alan Moore's most creative ideas for Swamp Thing was to give him global plant telepathy, a psychic bond to all the planet's vegetation. This gave Swamp Thing access to the collective consciousness of the green. By means of this mental connection, Swamp Thing was able to communicate with all plants on Earth, sense the health of ecosystems, identify environmental harm, and comprehend the delicate flow of life on a global scale. Being able to experience the world through the innumerable senses of billions of plants was a fundamental aspect of his identity as the avatar of the green. Humanity versus nature. In a court of law, human authorities tried Swamp Thing for the murder of Alec Holland in one of the stories. The entire storyline was a masterful legal and philosophical debate concerning Swamp Thing's personhood, rights, and the existence of the boundaries between nature and humanity. It forced readers to consider deep questions about identity and environmental ethics through a comic book lens. The scary side of being a god. As mentioned earlier, Swamp Thing's abilities gave him godlike control over plants and a strong bond with Earth after the major revelation in the anatomy lesson and his identification as the avatar of the green. However, there was a psychological cost to this. He gradually lost himself as a result of the incessant barrage of sensory data from every plant on the planet, the weight of his immense responsibility, and the realization that his unique self as Alec Holland was largely a delusion. Extending the legacy. The idea of the Green's champions was further developed in the New 52 era, following the dramatic events of Rotworld and the conclusion of Scott Snyder's tenure. Later stories introduced new individuals, who shortly took on the mantle of Avatar and showed the Green's capability to choose new protectors and adapt to threats. What's the message behind this? With numerous champions over the years, Swamp Thing isn't just one person, but rather a constantly changing role within the DC Universe's elemental forces. Marvelous verdict. Seriously, Swamp Thing is one of those characters that just keeps getting weirder and more wonderful, and I really hope you had as much fun knowing about these incredible facts as I did putting them together. What was your favorite fact? Or maybe there's a fact that we missed. Let me know all about it down in the comments below. And hey, if you love this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more such content and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.